Well, I don't think there's any question at this point if, in fact, he is responsible for the deaths of these three women, that he is considered a serial killer.
An accused serial killer indicted in the murders of 3 women, and additional charges could be on the way.
When a serial killer is in action, part of the reason they're able to kill again and again is because they're careful with the crimes they commit.
So how did he get away with it for so long?
But it does indicate that someone is preying potentially on these women, and doing so in an area where they can't be located.
And why was this accused killer previously granted clemency?
I think when we initially hear the story of the governor granting him clemency, we immediately think that she must have made a huge error.
Just this month, 39-year-old Jesse Lee Calhoun was indicted by an Oregon grand jury on 3 counts of second-degree murder and 3 more counts of second-degree abuse of a corpse. This comes more than a year after multiple bodies were discovered around the Portland, Oregon area. Here's the timeline. The body of 22-year-old Kristen Smith was the first to be found on February 19, 2023 in Portland. Several months later, the body of 32-year-old Joanna Speaks was found just north in Clark County. After that, 24-year-old Charity Perry's body was found in Ainsworth State Park on April 24th, and 31-year-old Bridget Webster was found on April 30th in Polk County. The last body recovered belonged to 22-year-old Ashley Reel, who was recovered on May 7th in Eagle Creek. An additional body was also recovered, but investigators determined it wasn't related. They did make the link between those 5 victims, though, and listed Jesse Calhoun as a suspect last July. But just this month, he was indicted on 3 of those murders: Charity Perry, Bridget Webster, and Joanna Speaks.
It's not uncommon when an individual is being investigated for a crime that instead of making the arrest, the district attorney's office will do what we call in New York an X or a silent indictment, where it gives them time, sometimes months, to put in the evidence against an individual without the individual knowing that the case is going on. And once that indictment comes, they will issue an arrest warrant for the individual to be apprehended and face the indictment.
That's Law and Crime legal analyst Julie Rendelman. I sat down with her to learn more about this case. And I know the grand jury proceedings are secretive. They're kind of kept behind closed doors. But is there anything we could imagine is happening in there that would yield these indictments?
I would expect that they may hear from, or may have heard from eyewitness testimony. Again, we're guessing. There could be statements from the defendant that were made. There can be DNA, circumstantial evidence, things that establish that the defendant was at the specific locations where the victims were eventually found, and that he was there to the exclusivity of everybody else. Again, we're guessing, and we will eventually find out some of the things that went in, because naturally that will be the evidence that is going to be used ultimately at the trial.
As Julie explains, there's a reason why Jesse Calhoun was indicted on counts of second-degree murder.
So every state has various degrees of murder. Oregon is no different. And so we still don't know whether or not this was just an intentional murder, or whether or not this was a murder that involved perhaps arson, rape, robbery, things of that nature that might escalate it to aggravated murder or murder in the first degree.
Let's pause this Jesse Calhoun story for a quick second to thank Morgan & Morgan for sponsoring today's Law and Crime news package. It's stories like this that remind you never know what's going to happen, and the world is an unpredictable place. So when you're hurt, it can be confusing, it can be scary, and you don't really know where to turn. Well, enter Morgan & Morgan, America's largest injury law firm. You can submit a claim in 8 clicks or less on your phone and find out if you have a case. And if you do, your injury could be worth millions. In the past couple of months, they've gotten verdicts of $12 million in Florida, $26 million in Philadelphia, and $6.8 million in New York. Also, they have over 1,000 lawyers, so you know you'll be in good hands. So if you're injured, you can start by easily submitting a claim at www.forthepeople.com/LCnews, or by dialing #law. That's #529 on your phone. Now, let's get back to the story. The case itself is still shrouded in mystery, including the way that the women were killed and why. And right now, there are still a lot of unanswered questions in this case. We know that the women died under suspicious circumstances, but we don't know how they were killed. Why may investigators be keeping that information close to the vest?
So that's a great question with not an easy answer. There can be many reasons. Sometimes they're hoping eventually they're able to get the defendant to talk, and they don't want to give him information. They also, there might be certain sensitivities with regards to some of the evidence, that by telling or telling the world about it, it may impact their ability to protect that evidence. Again, we're really guessing, and I think it's really just a short matter of time until we find out how it was that these individuals were killed.
But it's safe to say that starting from the time the first body was recovered, an investigation has been ongoing. So he was listed as a suspect almost a year ago in July 2023, and then just this month had been indicted. So during that entire time, was the investigation still ongoing?
We can only guess as to what was happening. One would assume, especially because we're dealing with multiple murders, and remember, we're also dealing with the potential that he was involved with even more, that law enforcement and the prosecutor's office was doing their due diligence, crossing their T's, dotting their I's, and making sure they had all the evidence they needed to guarantee that a jury would, in fact, indict.
And I know this is speculation as of right now because we still don't even know the cause of death or how these women were murdered. But we have these five people who are likely linked. How would investigators make that link? How would they connect all of these victims?
We know at the very least that the three individuals of which he was indicted for, those women were found in fairly remote areas. I think one was found by a creek, one was found in a park, one was found in an abandoned home. Not that that it means it's the same person, but it does indicate that someone is preying potentially on these women, and doing so in an area where they can't be located. When we talk about linking individuals together, it could be linked because of DNA. It could be linked because all of them work in the same type of field or are exposed to the same type of potentially criminal element. It could be linked because each of them are in the defendant's phone, and they were able to figure out the links starting in that direction. So it could be a plethora of things.
Does it make things more complicated that right now we have three victims and two potential additional victims? There are multiple people who were allegedly murdered.
I think the issue becomes that it seems that they're still investigating. So even though there's been these indictments for the three women, there's still possibly more indictments. It sounds like they investigated even a sixth murder and then ruled that out. And so it just means that the investigation seems to be ongoing, but they wanted to make sure that they got him on at least the three, as they continue on investigating the rest.
As investigators pointed out, the victims range in age and location. When I was looking at a map about all the places that these five women were found located, it was kind of all over the Portland, Oregon area. And immediately the wheels in my mind started turning, thinking, okay, could these have been different jurisdictions? So is it possible that the suspect in this case was going from place to place so that it may have taken longer for investigators to link or connect these murders?
Well, it's not unusual, especially when we're talking about a serial killer, that while they might kill someone in the same fashion, they will potentially move from area to area in the hope they won't get caught. Also, keep in mind that crime is sometimes one of opportunity. So, this might be an individual that was driving in his car looking for the next victim. We just don't know. But remember, if it's in different jurisdictions, it means law enforcement has to work together from each of these jurisdictions to make sure that they're sharing information as best they can.
Is that something that we're likely seeing here, that this man could have been a serial killer?
Well, I don't think there's any question at this point if, in fact, he is responsible for the deaths of these three women, that he is considered a serial killer. And I think in certain ways, it should alleviate those that live in the location, because they've hopefully caught the person responsible. But at the same time, it leaves unanswered questions as to whether or not We talk about them looking into two other victims. We heard about a sixth victim, but there could be more. There could be more in other jurisdictions. We just don't know yet.
So, if we're working under the assumption that this man is a serial killer, as you said, there could be additional victims. Is it possible that they're working with investigators in California or in Washington state, the neighboring areas, to determine whether he had crossed state lines and maybe killed there?
Absolutely. And remember, we're not in a time where people weren't sharing information. We have the internet. We have the ability to share information with states, with jurisdictions that we did not have in the past when we used to hear those stories where a rape would occur in California and that same individual would commit a crime in various states and no one knew about it. And so it's paramount for investigators to not just focus on Oregon and the areas where the victims were found, especially when you're dealing with someone that has committed multiple murders allegedly. You really want to expand your investigation to the neighboring states as well.
Julie says the crime itself is shocking, but not unheard of. And moving forward, investigators have their work cut out for them.
I'm not surprised. When a serial killer is in action, part of the reason they're able to kill again and again is because they're careful with the crimes they commit. They try to make sure there's no witnesses. They try to not leave behind evidence that will link them to the crime. And they do so potentially in areas of which either the victim is someone that they think is not going to be missed, or they take the victim to an area of which no one's going to see or hear what happened. So unfortunately, it's not surprising. And I think, in a sense, we're thankful that assuming he committed these crimes, that he's now in jail and hopefully never going to do this again.
The case takes yet another turn when we consider that the murder suspect had previously been granted clemency by then Oregon Governor Kate Brown. An interesting aside to this case is that previously, before he was arrested in connection to these murders or detained, he had been arrested and was serving time, and then the governor granted him clemency for his work in the 2020 wildfires. What do you make of that?
I think when we initially hear the story of the governor granting him clemency, we immediately think that she must have made a huge error. But when you hear more about the story, it sounds as though A, she did not know obviously anything about this case, and B, the clemency was granted to multiple prisoners that had assisted in the wildfires to a degree of which the governor thought it was appropriate not to stop their sentence, but to, I believe she took a year off of the sentence. Obviously, if the governor knew that he was under investigation and did this, then we're talking about a whole other set of circumstances.
Looking forward, Julie says there's still much work to be done in this case. And we are in the early stages of the investigation as of now and the court proceedings in general. What do you expect moving forward?
He's going to have an attorney. He'll appear in court. He'll begin facing these charges. And I assume with that, the prosecutor will be required to provide the evidence to his attorney and to him. At the same time, remember, negotiations are always going on with prosecutors and defense attorneys. And this could be, I'm not saying it is, this could be one of those cases where the prosecutor could, put out kind of a carrot in a sense and say, help us find the rest of these victims. Tell us where they are and who they are. And if you do that, we will grant you potentially a better deal than you would if you went to trial and lost.
Right now, Jesse Calhoun is being held in a medium security state prison, but will soon be transferred to the Multnomah County Detention Center for his coming arraignment. Reporting for Law&Crime, I'm Gillespie.